It is an attachment journal, yet it also includes aversion and now craving. Join me, Margaret Maloney, as I continue to observe my own attachments and consider craving and clinging. Oh, the joys of being human. Hi, it's Margaret Maloney, and welcome to Season 3 of the Death Dhamma podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so appreciative that you are part of my community. And yet, I seek not to be attached to the idea of the podcast or even to the idea of our community. And that's our topic this season: attachment, clinging, and aversion. What happens when we really want something? What happens when we really don't want something? And what does it do to our suffering and dissatisfaction? Let's dive in and find out a little bit more with today's episode. Recently, in episode 4, Unraveling Attachment, exploring the Buddhist teachings on letting go, we considered some of the teachings and the relationship between clinging and suffering, but not just clinging. In the Sammaditthha Sutta, the Discourse on Right View from the Majjhima Nikaya, Sariputta mentions craving and clinging. Both bring suffering. Let's consider what that looks like in our everyday lives. What is the difference between craving and clinging? Craving is wanting. I want something. Looking back on the past few days, here are some of the things I have craved: coffee, chocolate, other specific foods, solitude, time with friends. Yep, I crave both alone time and time with some of my special people. And when that gets out of balance, so do I. That in itself is probably worthy of future exploration. The reality is that this idea of balance that I have created for myself is not always going to be sustainable. Today, let's continue with craving and clinging. We crave forms. Forms being sounds, odors, flavors, tangible objects, and mind objects. Clinging. Now, clinging means, to hang on to something. Or maybe, to not want something to end, or to be unwilling to let go of an idea or a practice or a thing. The 4 things that we cling to are sensual pleasures, views, rituals and observances, and self. Thoughts of who we are. And recently, I know I was subject to clinging to this certain idea of who I am. And because of who I am, how I should act, or how things should be in order to maintain this specific image. That image had to do with my professional self. In my life, I share Death Dhamma, and I also am a teacher. I teach project management. And in that role, I have built this idea around how I want to be perceived, and I have created what I think are necessary behaviors to support that image. A lot of selfing going on here. One such behavior is being on time. The soundtrack in my head goes like this. You are teaching people estimating and planning and scheduling. What kind of a teacher are you if you do not start and end class on time? Let's look at that. Definitely, I am clinging to an idea of self. But it's not just about my own thoughts of who I am. Yes, that is a piece that I have invented and that I cling to. Craving comes in because I want my students to see me in a certain light. There's that wanting of them to perceive me as a certain way, in a certain professional, knowledgeable, well-behaved instructor, etc. This past week, I was teaching a few different classes. One was at an on-site location, and the drive home from that location, the commute, was typically about 45 to 50 minutes. Once home, I had another group of students joining me for an online check-in session. This group was taking a course that was mostly online with weekly Zoom sessions to cover specific topics and have more in-depth discussions. My students in the in-person course actually stayed later than the scheduled end time. Okay, now, I said I have this perception about starting and ending classes on time. That didn't bother me because they were staying behind voluntarily. I had wrapped up and declared the end of class, and they were staying in the classroom working on some projects. And it made sense because that's when they were all together. So they were staying in behind. I stayed a few extra minutes to support them with their coursework. And then I started my commute. At this point, I was already nervous because the commute needed to go well. In other words, it needed to, go really well so that I could be online and prepared on time for my Zoom session that I was going to lead from my home office. Okay, let the craving begin. Now I am craving a perfect commute. Home within 45 minutes so that I had time to catch my breath and then start the Zoom session. Perhaps you've heard of Murphy's Law, not a Buddhist concept. To my knowledge, not expressed in the Pali Canon. Murphy's Law, the concept of what can go wrong will go wrong. It begins to become obvious that this will not be a perfect commute. I cling to the idea that I still might make it, that I might be able to park my car, run in the door, and start the online session. As I realize that I'm going to be late, that self I constructed, that I cling to, that professional image of not being late and planning things better, that begins to arise within me. I feel it. I'll say I see it. I see it with my mind's eye. And I grapple with the idea that maybe I will only be a couple of minutes late. Eventually, I realize that the fair thing to do for the sake of my students is to send a message and advise them I'm running late, and set a time to join them online that is reasonable, not a wish, not coming from craving a specific thing, but based on the likely outcome. And I begin to understand that on this day, I am not going to live up to this self-created image of who I am. I get home. I start the online session and join my students. I apologize for the delay, and they are all very gracious about it. And we have an excellent discussion and good time together. Truthfully, we all live in an area where traffic can be unpredictable. So my situation is probably not a surprise, and most likely has happened to every one of us. So, is it wrong for me to want to be perceived in a certain way? Undeniably, I've got some ego going on here, right? In wanting or craving to uphold a specific professional image. But I don't have any intention of harm, any intention that's meant to be harmful. What I'm trying to say here is that I'm recognizing the ego in this construct of this professional self and this desire to be perceived a certain way. And of course, I have work to do there, which is why I'm journaling this and sharing it, right? But it doesn't come from an intention to deceive or harm or ill will to myself or others. With recognition of where I am in my practice, I look forward to the day when, in a similar situation, I will more quickly accept how things are, and I won't impose craving on my commute. I will just have a commute. And I won't be sitting behind the wheel thinking, oh my gosh, maybe there's an opportunity that I can shave 5 minutes off this drive. Or maybe all of a sudden traffic will magically clear and I will make it home just in time. Maybe, again, in the future, I can just have the commute. And don't worry or cling to an image, a self-image, or a specific outcome. Craving and clinging both belong in my attachment journal. And moving forward, I will seek, when appropriate, to identify what it is I'm craving. And I mean going back to forms, sounds, odors, flavors, tangible objects or mind objects. And to what am I clinging, right? Like in this example today, I was definitely clinging to that idea of self. And I was definitely craving that my students hold me with a certain mind object, that they think of me in a certain way. So to what am I clinging? And again, the things that we tend to cling to, what we cling to are sensual pleasures, views, rituals, and observances, and self. Not just to create and categorize data, but to gain a deeper understanding of my path. And so moving forward in the journal, I see a space for, how did craving arise in this situation and what it was the craving? And also, did that lead to clinging? And what was it that you were clinging? And as we move forward, and I give some more examples with aversion, the same thing. And so in this way, when we can identify the situation, identify that there was craving, or identify that they were clinging, and, to what, I think that can be helpful in terms of insight, developing more insight, and then, of course, to take it to meditation, sitting on the mat, walking, however you do your best work, your best self-analysis. If you're journaling too, I encourage you to do the same, to look closely at your own scenarios where craving and clinging arise. I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions, your own stories about attachment. So follow this link, I'm going to read it to you in a minute here, to leave me a 90-second message with your ideas and suggestions. You can go to https://www.speakpipe.com/death_Dhamma_podcast. I suppose you could also just use your favorite search engine to say SpeakPipe Death Dhamma Podcast. And there you can record an audio message for me. And be sure to come over to margaretmaloney.com. That's MargaretMeloni.com and join the community. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmaloney.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.